Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Monticelli. I'm a partner in the cannabis practice of Withum. And joining me today is Wendy Heiss, and the two of us are going to talk about, everyone is aware by now that Congress opened and caused a bit of a shakeup to the 2018 Farm Bill loophole, whereby intoxicating hemp beverages were basically, sold in 5 and 10 milligram containers, sold throughout the country, not subject to any 280E restrictions that cannabis, because it was not defined as cannabis, because it was less than 0.3% THC. But at the end of the day, they were intoxicating hemp beverages nonetheless. And there was an interesting estimate of the size of the market between 2023 and 2024. We're estimating about $1.1 to $1.3 billion in a market that was expected to grow very significantly to about $4.1 billion by 2028. And all of the big players are in, all of the small players were in. The barrier to entry was relatively small. But there are people who are really excited about this. The hemp farmers with strong lobbies, the liquor distributors, whereby they were able to enjoy just about twice the margins that they ordinarily get on spirits and wine. So as everyone is just poised to go forward with this and thinking that this is unstoppable, Mitch McConnell felt a little bit, I think he was a little upset, because his intention behind the 2018 Farm Bill certainly wasn't to make this a robust industry to circumvent the 280E experience and have restrictions. But nonetheless, here we are today. The government's open, and hemp has 365 days. So the question is not, okay, will there be a change? The real question is, with a new federal law setting the standards at 0.4 milligrams of total THC limits per container, and I guess we're waiting to hear what per container is, the fear is in 365 days, the hemp beverage market will be extinct. The real question is, we have clients, we have firms in the industry that have invested significant dollars. Where do we go from here? And today, I'd like to discuss that with Wendy, and we're going to spitball for the next 15 minutes or so on some options as to where to redirect, because I think life is not all about expectations occurring as you expect them. It's about dancing in the rain when it starts raining. So, Wendy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's for sure. I think we'll get ready to dance in the downpour, as they say. So I've been thinking about the different options, and I think there's some different things you can do based on the state that you're in. So of our 50 states in the United States, you have different categories. You have some states that will auto trigger to match the federal law. And so there's 27 states that will just, as soon as this passes and becomes effective, the state law will auto trigger to match the scheduling for the feds. You have 13 states that have to take some sort of administrative action to match. And then you have 10 states that it's at their discretion. So if you're in one of those 10 states where it's at their discretion, when you're not automatically matching the federal statute, maybe you have some more options than another state that's in that 27 auto trigger state where it's already clamped down and it's totally illegal. So I could see maybe there's some different pathways depending on the state that you're in, for sure.
Excellent. One of the thoughts that I had, Wendy, is, all right, so let's look at it from the consumer's perspective. They can walk into Total Wine, they can walk into a pharmacy and pick up their favorite beverage. Well, that's certainly going to come to an end within a year. So if I'm a hemp beverage company, look, it's the same plant. So why don't we reinvent this and use the same formula because customers have gotten used to wanting that taste and that experience for the intoxicating piece of that purchase. So why not just make it cannabis? Now, let's talk about what that means, because whereas before you didn't need a cannabis license, if you convert this hemp beverage to a cannabis beverage, you obviously would be subject to 280E from a tax perspective, whereas you wouldn't under the Farm Bill. You would have to have a cannabis license to manufacture the product, even if you bought the bulk to extract to manufacture the product. And your distribution network now is dispensaries. So, one of the issues that the dispensaries, first of all, the dispensaries typically aren't set up to handle the large volume of just the sheer size of the inventory, and refrigeration is another issue. So, we've all seen those little, refrigeration units, even in a supplement store that sells protein. So that's certainly an option. The question is, how do we go from where we are today? We certainly can't cross state lines because now it's federally illegal. So, but let's talk about, Wendy, what are your thoughts? Let's assume we produce this in X state, and we can get a cannabis license. We can make sure we sell through dispensaries, and we can certainly manufacture the product with THC derived from cannabis now.
Yeah, I think you raised some concerns, right? The dispensaries don't have kind of the widely accepted public, acceptance that a liquor store does, or your grocery, you're walking down the wine and beer aisle in your grocery store and it's right there. So you'll have some hurdles to get over with the public to get them traffic directed into a dispensary. Like you said, though, I don't think the want or the public's drive for an alternative beverage, that's not going away. Kind of, we've gotten the taste that we like a THC beverage more than we like an alcohol beverage, and it's easy to consume, and it gives us the effects we want without a lot of the negative effects of alcohol. So I think we have maybe a small hurdle to overcome to get them into the dispensary. And maybe it's the push that we need, and then they will, be the impulse buyers that we are, and we'll put a few more things in our cart than we planned on. And it's not just beverage, and now we have a bolster to the cannabis market as well.
An impact as a higher level of demand in the cannabis sector, but I sit here and wonder if we spitball, we're now locked into one state. And so the question is, how do we derive revenue across state lines without bringing the product across state lines? And we've seen this in cannabis. Like, some cannabis operators will develop their IP, their formulas, and they will go out to a white label manufacturer in another state. That white label manufacturer has a cannabis manufacturing license. They are going to produce a product that's consistent with the formula and IP that's used, and they're going to make sure that this white label manufacturer, they being the cannabis beverage operator, consistently produces the product with their specifications. Now, that white label manufacturer owns the inventory, has created the inventory. As they sell the inventory, they pay back on a royalty agreement. I feel like Mr. Wonderful in Shark Tank. It's a perfect extraction of revenue. They're going to pay a royalty for the use of the formula, the IP, and the know-how, and the consistency to make sure that the product is delivered across the country with the consistent expectations of the consumer. And at the same time, they're going to get their royalty stream. And I think that's a model that really works. It's got to legally be documented accordingly. But, it's certainly a way to execute. Logistically, there needs to be an emulsifier to produce this product. And I think the demand for emulsifiers in different states is going to become front and center to be able to pull this off and go across state lines to extract revenue. So I think that's one of the obstacles we have in the industry.
For sure. It's a different, when you talk about what we're used to in the cannabis market, it's very oil soluble, right, in the gummies or in the vape products. But to go to a beverage and get that emulsification right in a water soluble, it's a different animal, and it's a different technology that potentially we don't have in every state that cannabis is legal in. So
exactly. So we certainly have, I think there's opportunities in the market for firms who want to make some investments. Obviously, the more highly densely populated areas would be the better targets for those firms to focus on. But at the end of the day, I am I think some companies will just throw up their hands and go out of business within the year of this new law. But some companies will find a way to dance in the rain and actually make a cannabis beverage and do it well. And it'll be business as usual. Unfortunately, they will be subject to 280E. And we're waiting on Mr. Trump for rescheduling. And on any given Tuesday, I say, but who knows?
I think one thing we haven't kind of talked about, which is on the bright side, the feds, as part of this, have approved THC in a consumable, which is something we haven't really had. Like, so to your point, on a Schedule 1 or a Schedule 3, like, they've not positively put out there in the law that there is a level of THC that's approved now for consumables. It's our super low level. So, but it gives this, it's like the door's been cracked. And maybe this is cannabis and hemp's opportunity to come together and hopefully throw that door wide open. And rescheduling is all the more closer. You know, do we actually have a 365-day timeline on rescheduling now? Potentially this is kind of that catalyst that we needed.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. 280E, it's certainly got its share of pain, and it certainly stings at the dispensary levels, which is where these beverages would now have to be distributed from. But I think, when I look at other alternatives, I think a lot of companies will go out of business. The barrier to entry was relatively low for these small startups. And Wendy and I were when we were at the Hemp Beverage Expo in Atlanta this past, I think it was October, November, it was amazing how many participants were there at the large scale and small scales. And for a very short number of, small number of invested capital, you can get into the space. And a lot of people did. And I think for the people who have sufficient capital, they'll find inroads to converting this to a cannabis experience. For the smaller, I think some of those are going to be challenged. And unfortunately, those are the confines that we're living in.
Yep. What do you see kind of as those ones that aren't, they're kind of thinking, okay, this is the end. Are there some advantages maybe that we can help them with as you're wrapping things up and kind of making that final decision?
Well, it's a very good question. I think, the first thing I'd be concerned about is inventory. Because if I'm sitting on a lot of inventory, typically that inventory expires within a year. I'd be trying to unload that inventory. So I think there's going to be some price compression as a lot of the smaller players come to market and try to unload their inventory so they're not, think about it, they're trying to liquidate their assets if they're not planning to continue along a cannabis journey. So I think you're going to see some price compression in the 1 year period that Congress gave to be able to wind these down. So I think there'll be a glut of inventory on the market. So I think it's going to take some time to really set this up properly and convert this to a cannabis beverage. My only concern is what happens after the year. Can the pricing restabilize itself? And I quite frankly think it can, because you won't have any hemp beverages on the market at that time.
Yeah, your supply is going to for sure constrict, right?
Yeah, no question. No question. And I think consumers like the experience of that mode of delivery.
Yep. Yep. I've seen a few, at least the brands that I'm following or are involved with. I'm seeing a few of them say this has been our best sales week ever. Not in the last 6 months, not in the last month, but ever. And so it's almost, it's gotten out there, whether people are saying, hey, I have to stock up on my favorite drink, or it hit the public and they're like, hey, maybe I should give it a try, before I can't anymore. So, but I've seen several brands come out and say, like, this is our best week of sales ever. And so to your point, maybe there's some price compression. Maybe the consumer can get a deal as they're stocking up for the end.
That's very true. But I think, look, this has been great in terms of food for thought. But I think we end it here, and certainly will continue as the industry starts to evolve more. But I think the large players have a really good path forward in converting their beverages with the same recipes to a cannabis-based product. Unfortunately, the big losers in the space really are going to be the farmers and the liquor distributors. So at some point, when there is rescheduling, descheduling, some federal legalization or some element that puts the cannabis industry in a different path, I think we'll see alcohol, tobacco come back into this space in a big way, because when you look at, I can't remember the inflection point, but cannabis sales far surpass liquor sales now. So that industry, on any downslope, that industry is looking to get into the cannabis space. So I think great times are ahead for the cannabis space. I think investors need patience, and some people have run out of patience because it's been a long time with a lot of hearsay on whether it's going to reschedule, whether it's going to legalize, whether clients are taking the non-280E position that everyone talks about today, and the risks associated and the cost associated with that position. So I think this is good, but let's continue on another day. Wendy, thank you very much. And I'm Steve Monticelli. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Steve. See you next time.